Good morning. Good morning, students, faculty, and the wider community at Central Piedmont and Davidson-Davie Community Colleges. A very warm welcome to you from Cape Town, South Africa. My name is Desiree Hawkinson, and I'll be facilitating today's session on behalf of EDU Africa, along with my colleague, Ashley, who is helping in technical support. We are very excited to be engaging with you as part of your virtual study abroad experience in South Africa. Now, we believe in the power of stories like the ones you are going to hear today to connect people from different backgrounds. It is our hope that today's session will encourage you to practice openness, flexibility, and empathy for different cultures and worldviews. Today, we'll be introducing you to not one, but two incredible speakers who will be sharing their memories of the infamous maximum security prison, Robben Island. Former prison warden, Mr. Christo Brandt, will be sharing stories about his experience as a prison warden, with a special focus on his unusual friendship that he developed with one of his former political prisoners, none other than former President Nelson Mandela. And then on the other side of the prison experience, we have Mr. Lionel Davis. Now, Lionel's story is one of a person of color growing up in a racially charged country, his antagonism to white authority, his experience as a political prisoner on Robben Island for 7 years, and the long road of trauma and healing that followed. I've had the privilege of working with both Mr. Davis and Mr. Brandt for several years, and I've always loved listening to their stories and hearing from students how much these stories have impacted them, not only because of their experiences on Robben Island, but for all the other complexities of their lives and the lessons that they so freely share with us. These are stories that speak to the power of humanity to overcome adversity and break down cultural barriers. Susan, can I ask you to please share a few words on behalf of Central Piedmont and Davidson-Davie?
Sure. Good morning to everyone in the United States and good evening to our friends in South Africa. I'm Suzanne LaVenture. I'm the Director of International Education at Davidson-Davie Community College, and we are thrilled to be able to present this event to you today. This event is the collaboration between Davidson-Davie, Central Piedmont Community College, and EDU Africa. And it is made possible through a grant we received through the Stevens Initiative World Learning Ideas Grant with funding from the State Department. So I am just thrilled and amazed to be able to hear these stories from these amazing people today, and I'm glad you're here to share this experience with us. So I'll hand it back to Desi.
Thank you, Suzanne. Great, so hopefully you would have all received some pre-session preparation that was sent to you via email. Obviously this wasn't mandatory, but really would have helped you to better understand a bit of the context of what we'll be talking about today. Can I just see by a thumbs up, perhaps, if anyone managed to go through any of the material at all? Okay, I see a couple of thumbs going up there. Fantastic. That's really great. So we'd like to hear from you very briefly. If you can please share in the chat where you're from, if you're joining us from Davidson-Davie or Central Piedmont or the wider North Carolina community. And then based on some of those resources that you would have seen, has anything sort of stirred your curiosity? What are you hoping to learn today? What are you hoping to find out more about? If you could please share that in the chat as well. Great to see everyone's answers coming through in the chat. We'd love to hear what has piqued your curiosity, why you are joining us today, and what you are hoping to learn from these guest speakers. Cool, I see Suzanne says the Google tour of Robben Island was really cool. Thanks, Suzanne. Suzanne, what did you enjoy most about it? Can I ask you to
I just thought it was really cool to be able to go through at your own pace and, you know, see the Google photos with information and see the sites. And it was, you know, almost like you were there. So that was really awesome. Of course, I would not like to be there because it didn't look like an awesome place to be.
Cool. Kelly, can I ask you to unmute and just share your response with us, please?
Sure. Hi.
Hi.
So the response that I just posted about the reconciliation as well?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. So yeah, I really loved the materials, and I'm really looking forward to this. But, I just think that in today's kind of broken world, I'm really impressed and have a lot of admiration for the type of forgiveness that happens in the heart, that happens with individuals to help a country kind of reconcile their past. So I just am really interested in like listening and learning, from the speaker and from these resources. So I really appreciate that. I think it's really important today.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing.
Sure.
Moving on, did anyone attempt any of the Robben Island challenge activities over the last few days? I know some of you would have only received the resources this morning. I can't see anyone. There's not very many cameras on, but maybe if you can use the raise hand icon. Did anyone attempt any of these activities? Okay, I'm not seeing any hands. Okay, well, I would ask you, if you are interested in trying these after the session, you are more than welcome to. It really just was a bit of empathy building practice to be able to place ourselves very briefly in the shoes of the prisoners, not to make light of their experience, but just to build our empathy and understanding of what it's like to have some of your comforts taken away from you and lose some of those freedoms that we're so accustomed to. Right, so before we move on to sharing our stories, there are a few key terms that I would just like to cover with you. The most critical being that of apartheid. So this is a very important concept to understand. I know some of you would have been in our previous sessions, so would have some oversight of this. But apartheid literally translates to apartness, and this was the state-sanctioned system that was used to oppress and marginalize people of color in South Africa. So this racial oppression was formally instituted under state law between 1948 and 1991. But similar to the US, South Africa has a long history of racial segregation from its colonial days, when land was divided along ethnic lines and the majority of South Africa was taken over by the minority white population. So a typical case of 90% of the land being owned by less than 10% of the population. So the majority of Black South Africans were forced to move to locations and rural homelands. And you'll hear more about the forced removals from District 6 in Lionel's story. But land disposition is still a major issue that we face today. Then briefly giving you a quick overview of Robben Island and where you'll find that. It is situated just 5 miles off the coast of Cape Town, which is South Africa's oldest city by colonial standards. The island is most famous for its use as a maximum security prison during the height of apartheid, but little is known about its long history as a place of banishment and imprisonment for what we call the unwanteds in society. And historically, these included indigenous leaders, people who were enslaved, the mentally ill, once was a leper colony, and political prisoners as well. So this is the setting for much of today's conversations. And I've got a brief video to show you a little bit more about the prison.
To cope with the increasing resistance to apartheid and growing number of political prisoners, work started on a new prison in 1962. Like the Dutch occupiers in the 1600s, prison labor was used to build the jail. When completed, the Robben Island Maximum Security Prison became the most feared prison in South Africa. In the words of Oliver Tambo, it was the most inhospitable outpost of apartheid. Day-to-day prison life was grueling. Prisoners were kept in isolation cells and made to sleep on the floors and also in larger communal cells. Work on the island up until the mid-70s mainly consisted of hard labor, breaking stones in the prison yards or in the quarries. This limestone quarry is probably the most famous quarry in the world. Its workforce included many of our future leadership who spent years digging limestone under searing heat and blinding sun. all of the prisoners who worked here developed permanent damage to their eyes. A small cave at the back of the quarry provided some relief. It was used as shelter, a resting place, and parliament for some of the future leaders of South Africa.
Great. So as we move into our conversation, I'll be asking Christo and Lionel to share some experiences from their youth, their time on Robben Island, and the fall of apartheid. Please make use of the chat function if you have any questions that you would like to ask them. I will be monitoring these questions and will pose them to Lionel and Christo at the opportune time. But if you could please join me very briefly in unmuting your microphones and giving them a welcoming round of applause, we'll now move into our conversation with Christo and Lionel. Great. So thank you once again for joining us today. The Central Piedmont and Davidson-Davie participants have been on a virtual journey with us, looking at the history and culture of South Africa and discussing things like race, identity, and bridging cultural divides through a review of Trevor Noah's Born a Crime. Now, you both came from very different backgrounds. Chris, I'm going to ask you to go first, but Lionel, if you can then follow. Can you please share a bit about your childhood and what that was like? What kind of community did you grow up in? Christo, if I can ask you to share first.
Thank you. I grew up on a farm where I was the only white child playing with African children. My parents were very poor. My father was just a foreman. But on that farm, I learned respect because one day I was disrespectful to elderly African man. When my father gave me a hiding and said to me, the person can be black, but a human being like us. And God has made us all different colors and look alike, but we must respect each other as human beings. So I grew up with that respect. But at the age of 12, my father gets sick. We'd be in pneumonia. We moved off the farm and then we moved to a city. And in the city, I didn't have black friends to play with at all. And that was a time when I discovered things like discrimination against color.
Thank you, Christo. Lionel, if I can ask you to share a brief bit about your early childhood and growing up in South Africa. You are still muted. Sorry, Lionel. Lionel, can you unmute? Sorry, I think he's just going to go and Leon very briefly.
Yeah, I think you might muted everyone, I think. Anyway, he's back.
Thanks, Leon.
Here we go.
Okay.
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes, I know.
I grew up in a municipal district, a living area where people from different parts of society from all over the world lived. Black, white, green, pink, blue. We all lived in the same community. But most of the people were poor. I grew up in a poverty-stricken home with very little to share. But there were whites living in our area, and they were seen as superior to all other people. At an early age of 12, I became aware of white arrogance and prejudice and had my first confrontation with white authority at that tender age. That is what made me think about politics at a later stage.
Great, thank you so much, Lionel. Lionel, I know a lot of people have asked about the term coloured in South Africa and the different racial classifications. What does coloured mean? Can you maybe just shed some light on that term?
As I understand it, in those very early days, even before apartheid, there were these divisions. But as I understand it, there were two classifications that was then registered, black and white. And there was this other group of mixed parentage with descendants from different parts of the world, but especially African. They didn't have a title for them, and they then called them colored. So this grouping, classified as colored, is of a multiracial background. Initially they called them of mixed race, and then of course the Nationalist Party introduced this word of colored. So whether you were Muslim or Christian, but you were supposed to be of black and white, a black and white mixture, which is not really true. I am a mixture of white and black from all over the world, even Indian. So, but I do not accept the term colored. I'm a South African, proudly South African.
Thank you, Lionel.
Don't give me a tag.
No problem. Krista, while we're talking about different sort of classifications of people groups in South Africa, can you maybe explain what an Afrikaner is?
Okay, like I've seen it, in the 1600s, Europeans came to South Africa. They mixed here, and they've got Malay people came here, and there was Khoi people, there was all people together, and they formed then a language called Afrikaans. It's called Dutch today, which is our own individual language, and that's what I understand as Afrikaner, people with the Afrikaans language.
Okay, thank you. Lionel, were you aware that you were living in a time of racial segregation when you were younger? What was your first recognition of apartheid?
I must have been about 12 years of age when, in 1948, when the Nationalist Party came into power. But segregation did not start from then. Segregation started when the Dutch came in 1652. And they started subjugating the indigenous people, taking away their land, and even removing their identity, exterminating my forefathers with smallpox and the barrel of the gun. And they were the ones to introduce segregatory policies much more than the colonial rulers. This question of identity, by dividing the populace and making them believe that they were either superior or inferior to each other, they could then control. There would be no power force to want to take away their power because you had your own problems to deal with, a segregated community.
Cool. Thank you so much for sharing. Christo, can you let us know what prompted you to become a prison guard?
I never want to become a prison guard. What happened during that apartheid years, all white children was forced for military training for 2 years. After you left school, immediately military take you in and you must go for military training. But a year before I left school, one of my best friends was called up for military training. I see him off on Cape Town station. And that day when he said to me, you don't really want to join the military. You don't want to fight black people in the townships. That years the military operated in our townships. You don't want to fight black people on the borders. You want to become a medical doctor, but now he's forced for military training. 6 months after his training, he was sent to the borders and killed by so-called terrorists. And that day when he sat in the church, the priest said, what hero this gentleman was to our country. How protect our country against the black enemy. For me sitting in that church that day, he was not a hero. He didn't want to be there. The blacks was not my enemy. I made a decision. I will look for something alternative, not to join the military. Then a gentleman visited our school in that last year of me on school, grade 12. He visited our school and they're looking for prison guards. I was not really interested. Till he mentioned exemption from military service. Then I have a chat with this gentleman. And I explained to him, I not really want to become a prison guard. I want to become an electrician. He said, that's a right opportunity to take. Become a prison guard. After your training, you can apply to work in the prison workshops, become an electrician, and you can help prisoners and train them to become electricians. That was the reason I became a prison guard.
Cool, thank you so much for sharing. So Krista, when you first met Mandela as a prison guard, you were only 18 years old. So how did you, as a young white Afrikaner, first begin interacting with a 60-year-old Black Xhosa-speaking man? And was there ever a sense of hatred or antagonism towards one another?
You know, that first day when I report for duty on Robben Island, the head of the prison told us we're going to meet the biggest criminals in the history of South Africa. These guys got life sentences, he said. Some have double life sentences. We had to break the spirit of these guys. These guys are here to do hard labor. But that morning when I walked to the section, opened the cell doors, I see elderly African men stand up from the floor, greet me with respect, and very humble, and no tattoos on their face. After I read the names on door, Andrew Mlangeni, Walter Sisulu, Raymond Mushlaba, Nelson Mandela, all these names, I never heard these names before in my life. I asked the sergeant, what is this criminals in for? They look so humble and polite. He told me that's a terrorist to try to overthrow our country. That's the ones who killed our children on the border. Immediately I feel I must hate these guys. These are the guys who killed my friend on the border. But later when I work with him and see how hard they work in a limestone quarry and different places where I work with him, I was seeing a different type of person, and I start understand and start feeling for them, because my father said on the farm, I must respect elderly people. Don't look at the color of their skin. And you know, and then when I work in a census office, that day when I start there, my superior said I must help unpack the boxes of the cards. And that was birthday cards for Mandela's 60th birthday. We count 55,000 plus a few odd cards. That was massive. Then I realized Mandela must be somebody special. And that's how I start knowing the man better.
Awesome, thank you so much for sharing. So Lionel, your journey to Robben Island is very different and involves a lot of antagonism to white authority that you've already touched on a little bit. Can you tell us how you got into political activism and landed up at Robben Island?
As I said, my first confrontation with white arrogance, white authority was at the age of 12. And as I grew older, I became more aware of how Black people were being treated by that white arrogance. And I started rebelling against such authority. When I started working as a laborer at the age of 18, I had constant confrontations when I saw Black people being manhandled, mistreated by whites. That is what made me then go to political gatherings, meetings, protest gatherings, and that is where I started becoming aware of apartheid and how it operates. It also made me join a political organization called the African People's Democratic Union of South Africa. And that is where my formal education in understanding the country in which I live, that catapulted me to join a political organization and eventually landed up on Robben Island as a political prisoner.
Great, thank you, Lionel. Can you also please share some of the ways in which prisoners were treated on Robben Island and how maybe you overcame some of these?
Now, as I said, we came from a very segregated society. Now, government registered 4 groups of people, South Africans. You were white, supposedly of pure European origin. You were Black, you were Xhosa, Zulu, Shangaan, whatever it is, Zulu. You were classified as Indian because of your, I would say, Indian Eastern origins. And then you were classified as colored, supposedly of mixed race. Now, all of that is a lot of baloney, because if you look at whites in South Africa, a huge percentage of them had slave origins, had Khoisan origins, intermarried with white. So this idea of white, black, and colored is something which was created by those who wanted power and wanted to retain power. Because once you see yourself as superior or inferior to other people, you started believing that they are the enemy. And this is how you grow up, with that kind of mentality, that hatred. So when I got to Robben Island, I was classified as colored. There is no difference between me and Mandela. We have the same bushy hair, the same skin color. We have the same forefathers, but I just had this colored identity label. So when I got to Robben Island, I experienced that at first hand. I was given shoes and socks, a long pants, shirt and jacket, and a hat. If you were classified black, you were given sandals, no socks, short pants, shirt jacket, and a little like cap. Food discrimination too. If you were Asiatic or colored as a prisoner on Robben Island, you got 2 level teaspoons of sugar for your porridge in the morning. If you were black, according to law, 1 level teaspoon. Come lunchtime, you have the discrimination in food again. And in the evening, more blatant, Asiatics, coloreds were given a quarter loaf of bread with fat or with jam, soup, and coffee. If you were black, you did not get bread. They said, bread is not a black man's staple food. So they had to eat soft maize porridge again. That's when they get the veg, and then they would then get soup, no coffee. Coffee was only for those classified colored. And when were given meat, I think we got meat 3 times a week. Asiatics and coloreds got twice as much meat than their brothers. This was the discriminatory practice in all jails in South Africa. Whites, of course, did not do time with black prisoners. And when they were sentenced, they were given underwear, they were given shoes and socks, warm clothing, and better quality food. They also slept on beds. We never did then.
Lionel, can you explain a little bit about photos like this that were released to the media and very much sort of propaganda photos? Can you maybe speak into this?
Yeah, I remember. It was, I cannot know, it could have been around about 79 or earlier, when there was a contingent of whites, newspapers, and authoritative figures that came to Robben Island. It was a time when there was still discriminatory practice. And those classified black had to wear short pants and sandals and no hats, face like caps. But on that particular day, when this contingent of newspapers and authoritative white people came to Robben Island, suddenly, even black prisoners who had been wearing short pants all the time and these face like caps were given hats, long pants, decent shoes, and socks. And this is what they wanted the world to believe, that there was no discrimination for prisoners on Robben Island. That was a lie. That was propaganda. And this is what you see at this in this particular photograph.
Thank you. I'm going to quickly interject. Considering Lionel was talking about how prisoners were forced to sleep on the floor, I'm going to ask if everyone who is sitting either on their own chair or their own bed or in their own space, your rights and privileges have now actually been taken away from you. So I'm going to ask everyone who's able to please remove yourself from your chair or bed and sit on the floor. Obviously, if you are not able to do this, we do understand. But this again is one of those empathy building practices. So as you can see, I'm also moving myself to the floor, and we will continue our discussion from here. Christo, you and Mandela shared a very special secret that built a trust for life between the two of you. Can you please share that story and how that trust became a friendship, even though Mandela was still your prisoner for several years thereafter?
You know, in 1979, that morning when Mandela, I informed him about the visit, and I take him to the visiting location. At the visiting location, we put him in a single cell there. I was instructed to fetch the visitors from the boat. And that morning, when I fetched the visitors from the boat, it was 12 African ladies. When I direct him to the visiting center, Winnie Mandela was one of them. And then I see the lady take off a raincoat. She take off a blanket. That years, they protect him against the bad weather because visitors to the prisons was all black, colored of Indian. They was not allowed to sit inside the boat. There was no white people visiting prisoners. So when she take that off, I observed she don't have a backpack with her about the baby infant. I immediately instructed her she was not allowed to bring a baby along. But she begged me, she caught a baby on the island, and she please want to show Mandela. That year's Mandela get one visit every 3 months for 30 minutes by one person only. So what happened when she's in a waiting room, we put the prisoners in the different cubicles because visits was not contact visits, and visits was also recorded for National Intelligence Security Branch. And then we brought Winnie Mandela in, and Mandela sat on the other side, and the baby was left in a waiting room. But when a steel panel opened, they start communicating with each other. During this communication, she told her husband, Mandela, she had brought his grandchild to Robben Island. That moment, Mandela looked back. He begged me, please, Mr. Brandt, is it possible just to see the infant through the window? Which my answer at that moment to him was, Mandela, you know the prison regulations. You're not allowed to see a child. That years, prisoners could have seen their children at the age of 16, but they make sure they only give black people identical books at the age of 18. So Mandela never see a small child on the island. So then my superior walked in later, he touched my shoulder, he said, tell your prisoner 5 minutes left. We always warn prisoners 5 minutes left of their visit. At that moment, Mandela looked back, he begged me again, please ask the warrant officer if it's possible, if I can just see my wife on a distance, walk away from the building with a baby infant. So I walked back to my superior, asked him what Mandela requested, and he looked at me, warrant officer the priest, still alive today, very old. He looked at me, he said, Brandt, if you can get hold of that baby without Winnie Mandela, no, we can show Mandela the child. So I walked back to Mandela, I said my answer is no, the window closed, Winnie is taken back to the waiting room. But that moment when Mandela stand out at his cubicle, he looked at his notes, always made some notes for discussions, and he begged me, please, Mr. Brandt, just please pass this message to my wife. I said, Mandela, what is the message? She said, please tell my wife she must apply for visit for Christmas Day. That was more than 6 months in advance, and you want to make sure she come at Christmas. That moment, my superior walked in, asked me what's the delay. I explained him what Mandela requested. He looked at me. He said, Brandt, Mandela, 1 minute. Brandt fetch his wife back that he can tell him himself. That moment, I know the tape recorders were switched off. When I walked to the waiting room, Winnie Mandela already has the infant in her arms. There was rotation of visitors. And I walked in and I said, ma'am, can't I hold the baby? I never held the African child. She pushed it in my arms. She grabbed the handbag. She tried to bribe me with some money. I said, ma'am, I don't want your money. I will just hold the baby for you. And I take her to the visiting booth. When she's inside, I locked her in and I sneaked to the side of Mandela. And after Mandela passed his message, my superior closed the window. He see me in a passage and he came immediately straight to me. And that moment when I take the baby out of my arms, he kissed the child twice and there were tears in his eyes. I become quite emotional. That same moment, Winnie Mandela knocked on the door, she's locked in, and quickly I take the baby back from him, go to her side, apologize, I locked in and gave her the infant back. She was still begging me to show him the child. When she came to the mainland, the media was waiting for her to get information from the island. But the police was there to take her away. She was under banning orders and house arrest. But she managed to tell the media she smuggled this baby to Robben Island, but could have not shown her husband on a distance. On the island, when I take Mandela back to his cell, he didn't mention it to his comrades. He was afraid if that message leaked out, he should have lost maybe his studies, visits, and small privileges. I should have been charged, smuggled with a prisoner, which was called a terrorist. And the minimum sentence they promised our guards to help these guys was 5 years imprisonment. That secret was between me and Mandela for nearly 20 years till I become the president. From that moment, we share a secret between the two of us. And that's where we start also our friendship.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Lionel, can I ask you to share a bit about the relationship between you and other prisoners on Robben Island? Was there some sense of camaraderie, or, you know, being in an individual cell, were you quite restricted in how much you could engage with other prisoners?
I spent most of my time in that section, single cell section, where Nelson Mandela and the so-called leadership of political organizations were held. Prisoners who were regarded as troublemakers, instigators, were not allowed to mix with the general prison population. Most of my 7 years I spent in a single cell, just 1 or 2 cells away from Nelson Mandela. But I had the privilege of initially spending my time in a large communal cell with plus minus 60 prisoners in a cell. We were those classified Asiatic and those classified colored and those classified black. It was my first time in my life that I lived together, slept next to each other, shared food with people, South African people, from different walks of life, classified differently. We grew up with prejudice, disliking each other because of this racial discriminatory practice. But that was my first time that I started living with fellow prisoners, sharing and caring for each other, living as equals, fighting together, standing together for the transformation of the jail. This is something that I will never forget. It is something that transported me in my life, because wherever I went, I made it an effort to connect with people and to share my experiences and treat each one with respect and love, regardless of where you come from.
Thank you, Lionel. I see Nadine's asked a question that's kind of pertains to what we're talking about, you know, different people imprisoned on Robben Island. Nadine, can I ask you to unmute and phrase your question to Lionel at this stage, please?
Yes, my question was, I understand that whites were not imprisoned with blacks on Robben Island, but were there Asians as well as blacks and colored? So were Asians imprisoned on Robben Island, or was it just blacks and colored?
What happens is, in the language of the oppressed and those fighting for freedom, for us, there were 2 categories. You were either black or you were white. And in the black category, if you were classified as colored, or you were classified as Asiatic of Indian, Pakistani origin, you were on the black side. That is how we saw you. In jail, of course, we were jailed as Asiatics, as coloreds, and as black. Asiatics and coloreds in jail were given better food than our black comrades. When I talked about the difference in who got bread and who did not, Asiatics and coloreds were given bread, better clothing, and slightly better food. But it is also where we learned to share our food. That is where we learned to fight for the transformation of jail as equals. And with the help of the international communities and the fight of our own people for our freedom and for change in jail, conditions did change. Food, the quality of food, the wearing of better clothing, that came long after my release from jail. But it is, and when we started playing sport from 1966 onwards, we integrated sport. It wasn't a black team playing against a colored team, playing against an Indian team. We integrated sport. Regardless of whether you were an ANC member or a PAC member or belonged to the Black Consciousness Movement, you joined the same teams, wore the same kit. And this is what helped us to grow as a political family on Robben Island. Not an ANC tag or a PAC tag, but as comrades, as freedom fighters. That was my major experience as a prisoner on Robben Island.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lionel. Krista, I want to ask you a question. Nelson Mandela was very passionate about education. How did he influence you in terms of improving your education and getting a better education? So, I mean, like Lionel's just shared about how he was empowered by other prisoners on the island. How were you affected by Mandela and his passion for education?
You know, at the end at Paulsmoor prison for the last 8 years, I was in charge of the education department where Mandela was one of my students. And he was the one who always complained about education, talk about education, how important education for me, till he gave up hope. Then he smuggled a letter out of prison through one of my best friends, which was a prison guard. That was for my wife. And that time with a chocolate. And when she received it, we still have the letter today. He said he put his last efforts to her to pressurize me that I must also get educated. Educated, I can look better after my family and more responsible and so on. So when my wife started talking about education, I said to her one day, you like one of my prisoners. I didn't tell her whom. And she knew, you know, she hid that letter for me for 3 years. But he was a person. Then I decided to start studying, and I studied things in the prison department to upgrade my rank, and I become then a warrant officer after that. But at Paulsmoor prison, that end, we was 90% on the time on standby. Because after 85, Mandela was negotiation, then it's that way, and then we take him out there. There's a lot of things happening that I could have not really concentrate on education. But he was a person said always, even a poor person, don't give him money, but give him help with education. With education, he can find a job for himself and he can look after his family. And education is the most powerful tool in the hand of a poor person that he believes in.
Stunning, thank you. Let me just quickly share screen again. Before we move on to the next question, I'm going to invite you all to sit back on your chairs and your beds, wherever it is that joining from, because I know you're probably likely very uncomfortable.
Thank you, Desi.
Can I ask you to maybe just think about this experience of sitting on the floor in a bit of discomfort? Would anyone like to share some thoughts that they've had from this little brief sensory experience? You're welcome to unmute and share.
As a 51-year-old, it was very uncomfortable and difficult to get up, so I cannot imagine doing it long term.
Thank you for sharing, Terry. I appreciate that. Julie, I see you're unmuted. Yes.
So I was trying to take a few notes while I was sitting on the ground. And so it made me reflect on the fact that I've read and heard that Nelson Mandela started his book, writing his book while he was in prison. So I thought to myself, God, killed my lower back just to take notes sitting on the floor. So I can't imagine, you know, all the studying and work that he did and the writing that he did in his cell.
Brilliant. Thank you, Julie. Has anyone got anything else? Sharika, I see you're unmuted.
Yes, at first it was not uncomfortable, but I think as the time progressed, because I'm used to sitting on the floor and I do it crisscross, with my legs, but after a while, it got very uncomfortable, and the longer I sat there, my lower back began to hurt, and I can't imagine having to do that all the time. So I actually had to get up before you told us to. I had to get up and stretch. So it was very uncomfortable, but in the beginning, it was not. But as time progressed, it became very uncomfortable for me.
Oh, thank you so much for sharing, Sharika. Anyone else before we move on? Okay, let me just stop sharing. Okay, Lionel, can I ask you, your time on Robben Island was traumatic, but I know that you have an even more traumatic experience of what happened after Robben Island. Can you maybe share a bit about your house arrest and how you found healing after that?
I spent 7 years on Robben Island from 1964 until 1971. On my release in 1971, I was not a free man because the security police were waiting for me. I was taken to the nearest police station and I was given a banning order. A banning order restricts your movement, your daily movement, that tells you where you can go, where you cannot go, what time you had to be at home, what time you could be out and about. You were confined to a restricted area. Beyond those boundaries of that area, if you were found beyond those boundaries, that was a criminal offense, a black mark on your name. When you were in the street, in that area that was defined for you, you could talk to one person at any given time from 6 in the morning until 7 in the evening. You can speak to a person when you are walking. If you spoke to two people at the same time in that particular area where you lived, that was a criminal offense. You were not allowed visitors. A visitor comes to your home. That visitor can speak to your family. But if that person engages you, that is a political gathering, criminal offense. You were not allowed to go near any seaport or airport because they feared that you would escape. You had to report to the nearest police station once a week. If it's police station X and it is on a Wednesday, it has to be every Wednesday between the hours of 6 in the morning until 7 in the evening. If you report late, it is registered, you reported late. If you did not report, those are all black marks against your name. Those black marks are then added up, and the government then decides that you made too many offenses, you go back to jail. When I was in jail, there were two fellow prisoners who had more than once broken their banning orders, those restrictive orders, and they each one was given a 3-year sentence. Now that was the most traumatic experience in my life, because in jail as a prisoner, I had friends. We laughed together, we cried together, we stood together, we played sport together, we shared our food. We were one. Now I was alone. Friends that I had known before, when they saw me in the street, they would cross and move to the other side. They did not want to connect with me. Living like that, you have a choice. If you stick to the rules, the likelihood is that you will lose your sanity. If you break the rules, you are likely to end up in jail. After 5 years of such treatment, I was beginning to lose my sanity. That ended it's from 1971 until 1976. 76, I had to endure that pain. Once that banning order had stopped in 1976 and I was free to move about, I came across an art center. As a child, I loved drawing, but I had no formal education, did not do art at school. But when I had that opportunity and I saw that art school, I inquired and joined the community arts project. And at the age of 41, I received my first formal art education. It changed my life. That is when my healing started. I have been making art for more than 40 years, starting at that particular point. It is something that I love doing. If you look at my wall behind me, you will see there some of my artworks. I've also had a major exhibition, a retrospective exhibition, at the age of 81 at the South African National Gallery. I don't know if you saw that book that I held. The title of the book is called Awakenings, and it's all my artwork. And 12 people, I think 11 or 12 people, write about me, who I am, what I had done. And my partner in life, you saw the picture of my partner. Her name is Barbara. She also wrote about me. That is what I achieved. But I didn't write the book. It was written by somebody else. But there is some of my writing in there. So I am an artist, and I proudly say I am an artist.
Thank you, Lionel. Can I please ask both of you, actually, can you explain your experience when witnessing the end of apartheid, the drafting of the new constitution, and Nelson Mandela being named president? Christo, if I can ask you, please, to answer first. What was it like for you seeing the end of apartheid?
You know, for me, when Mandela became president, I was very happy and excited. My prisoner became president. But one morning he called me to his office, invited me for a coffee. And then after a chat, I said to him, President Mandela, there's something I must tell you today. He said, anything, Mr. Brandt. I said, you're the president of your country, but you don't feel like a president for me. You still feel like a prisoner. He was very surprised. He said, why you say that, Mr. Brandt? I said, when you was a prisoner on Robben Island, you was guarded by prison guards. When you was released, walk at freedom, I never see you walk alone in a shopping mall. You was guarded by private security. And now you're the president, you're still guarded by police. And the old man looked at me quiet for a while. He said, Brandt, you know, today this prisoner can tell the police in what direction to walk. You know, he was letting me believe you're feeling free. And so it happened also a few months after that, he invited me back to his office. And he let me sit and he said, I just came back from holiday in Bahamas. And I tell my security, you said I'm a prisoner. I don't want to see them inside. I want to walk alone in this beach. He said, but I'm old. I walk very slow. Then a young couple approached me, greet me very friendly. Then a young lady looked at me and she said, sorry, sir, are you not President Nelson Mandela? Mandela said then to me, Brandt, then I start getting worried. Oh, what I tell that young lady that morning, I said, ma'am, I would love to meet that guy myself one day. And she made excuse. She said, sorry, she met President Mandela. So I was happy he was free. But you know, I was working in the drafting of the new constitution. When that constitution was ready in 1996, I was the first one who printed the constitutions. So I must take to the president's office 10 constitutions that morning. And when I arrived there, they said, no, take it straight through to the president. And Kathrada was not there. Then I asked him if he can autograph one of my constitutions. So he autographed it for me and my family. And then he gave me coffee. And then I said, he must excuse, I'm busy working still. And then I said to him, Mandela, I'm going to bribe you with your constitution. You already signed it before it was adopted. So he just laughed. He said, Mr. Brandt, make sure you make good money out of it. So that is how I end up with the constitution and my president.
That's brilliant. Thank you. Lionel, can you share a bit about your experience?
Well, I was, as Christo Brandt was, I was very excited because I was thinking of a major transformation in our country. The things that we had fought for, that people had died for, would now be achieved. And Nelson Mandela, yes, he had this wish for the transformation of the country. And if he had ruled for another 5 or more years, I am sure we would have achieved what people had died for, what we had craved for. Unfortunately, I just believe he was too old. He deserved an opportunity to live his own life. He was forced to become the president by his organization, by the world. But I believe he needed that opportunity to experience his freedom. The unfortunate thing about South Africa today, there have been major changes, but the promises that Mandela had made, the vision that he had for a new South Africa, has not been realized. I just believe there are too many greedy people running this country who are more concerned about getting rich, their families getting rich, their cronies getting rich, at the expense of the millions of people who have been suffering for many hundreds of years. This is my way of looking at it. We still have a hell of a long way to go to achieve, hopefully one day, what Mandela believed in, what he had promised us.
Thank you, Lionel. Christo, I have a question for you here from Tyler. But Tyler, I'm going to ask you to please unmute your microphone and pose your question to Christo. Tyler's still on our session. Hi, Tyler, we can hear you.
Hi, yes, I'm here. I'm sorry. Christo, I did have a question. If you can name just one, and it might be really difficult to pick just one thing, but what is one thing that you learned from your friendship with Nelson Mandela that continues to impact you today, whether it's how you live or just your entire thought process about South Africa and the world itself?
You know, what impacted me of Mandela was he was a humble, down-to-earth, disciplined man with integrity. He was a person go the extra mile to help people around him. He was not a person that inherit for himself. If he has money in prison, for instance, and his prisoners want to study, he will give his last away. I remember in a cell where was a young prisoner came in Portsmouth, he give his food away for that person to make that person happy. He's a person who would always believe in education. He was a person also let me see there's not a color barrier because we were all equal. And like I said to him, is where I grew up on a farm. Both of us grew up on a farm where was not apartheid being seen. But when we moved to the city, we see the opposite. And then we land on Robben Island, and here's a guard, here's a prisoner. And we come together and become friendship. And I want to spread this message to the people. We must live the legacy of Nelson Mandela to help each other in life and help people around you, which is poor, not with money, but help people with education. If you educate a poor person, he can look after himself, he can find a job, and he can look after his family. That I learned from him.
That's awesome. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you so much. Talking about the legacy of Mandela, a very good question has come up from Suzanne. So Suzanne, can I ask you to unmute?
Sure. So this question is for Mr. Davis. And we all know about Mandela and what a great man he was and one of the key figures of the 20th century. But I also know that one person cannot do everything by himself. So I know there were many other people like you, Mr. Davis, who were involved in the, abolishing of apartheid. So could you talk about some of the other people that were key figures in the movement?
Well, I was not a member of the African National Congress. I belonged to an organization titled the National Liberation Front. And we had 11 of us who were sentenced in the Cape Town Supreme Court, 4 women and 7 men. One of the women in that grouping, her name is Dulcie September, who after her house arrest decided to leave South Africa, settled in France. She had joined the African National Congress, and her office base was in Paris. She was assassinated. I think it was in 1988 she was assassinated. By whom? We do not know. Then we had people like the late Dr. Neville Alexander, largely educated in Germany, who has died now, who was an important educationist, leftist, but a well-respected man in jail by all political organizations, whether it was the Pan-Africanist Congress, the African National Congress, and other organizations. Neville and I, the late Justice Fikile Bam, Marcus Solomon, and a few others, were all there in that section where Mandela was. The wonderful thing of our relationship with other political organizations is the respect that we learned for each other. That you met people who were more willing to die for what they believed in than you were. And this is one of the great lessons that I have learned in jail. It's not what you say you are, it is how you live your life that will tell me who you are. And Nelson Mandela was an example of what I am talking about.
Thank you.
Lionel. So Nadine has a question for both of you. Nadine, can I ask you to unmute, please?
My question was, as it pertains to politics in South Africa today, do you both feel free to be able to voice your political opinions without any adverse reactions? And do you find that you have to temper that based upon who you are communicating with when you have those discussions?
Shall I answer that?
I would love for you to
What
answer
happens is, one of the changes, the fundamental changes that have taken place in South Africa is freedom of speech. As I said, there have been changes, not the fundamental changes that we so desired, but there are freedoms. And one of those freedoms is the ability to speak your mind. You do no longer have to hide for fear of arrest. You do no longer have to write for fear of arrest. And that is why I have spoken the way I have spoken today. I do not have to fear because I speak the truth. There are countries where you cannot do that. And that is one of the things that we had fought for. And that is one of the things that still endures, freedom of speech. I am not afraid to say what I feel and how I feel.
Thank you. Mr. Brand?
I believe that's the truth. We can speak what you want to say, but what also, as I can say in South Africa, when apartheid phases out, our schools was also multiracial. Children can grow up together. They can speak together, they can play together, they can walk, they can go wherever they want together. There's not that they can be arrested to be a guy with a black lady, of the opposite, the other way around. It means there's freedom for everything in our country. But like young people in South Africa said, freedom was too big for them. I speak to a lot of students at UCT. Freedom was too big for them. That's why respect has fallen away in our country. That's all we need to bring back, is our respect for each other.
Thank you.
Yes,
Very much. Lynn, you've also posed a question, also to both Christo and Lionel. Can I ask you to please unmute?
Yes, Mr. Davis and Mr. Brand, I just want to know, after Mandela was released from prison, did you have a relationship with him as South Africa's first Black president? And if so, what was that like?
After Mandela was released from prison, or after he became president, sorry, I was also working in the president's office for about 10 days, till he introduced me to Cyril Ramaphosa. Then I started working with the drafting of the new constitution. And I was also invited to different functions and parties with Mandela. I was on his 80th, 85th, 90th, and all these different birthday parties and celebrations. And there was times when he invited me one day, especially to Johannesburg, to come and visit him. He's alone that day, he was on pension. And that day when I visited him, he called a lot of children together, and I didn't know what is happening, or maybe a child's birthday party. But then he introduced his children to me and said, that is his grandchildren. And he started introducing, telling him I was his prison guard. And they could have not believed that. Till I asked him later, President Mandela, how many grandchildren do you have? And the old man became quiet. He looked around as he to stock take. Then he said to me, Mr. Brandt, I stopped counting. There's grand and grandchildren. That's what I really enjoyed. The old man retired. He could have at least enjoyed life with his children, because he didn't have the chance to have children when he was in prison. So I was very happy he could have retired with that. Yes, I was not in touch with him after he became president and he was retiring.
Thank you. Mr. Davis?
Well, my experience is so very different from Christo's. I did not have contact with Mandela. From the time of his release, I had no contact with Mandela. But I had been invited to share a platform with one of his colleagues, Ahmed Kathrada, when it was Mandela's birthday, and he had already passed on, Mandela, but we celebrated his birthday at one of the South African institutions. And I was invited by Mr. Kathrada. Crystal Brandt was also there with us. And I had an opportunity to talk about Nelson Mandela and the value of education, because we were talking to tertiary students and university graduates who had gathered. It was in the Transvaal, in the Johannesburg area, yeah, or in Pretoria, I think it was, that we had an opportunity to celebrate his birthday and to talk about this iconic figure. All of those guys have passed away. All of the Rwandonian trialists that were in jail with me, 7 of them, they have all passed away. But I do have good memories of my time that I experienced with Mandela and the other ANC comrades.
Thank you.
Great. I would like you to invite you to still, if you do have any further questions, to share them in the chat. I am going to ask you to do another quick engagement with us. So if you had gone through some of the pre-session materials, you would have seen reference to some of Lionel's work that was shared. Here are a few of those artworks that were shared with you. So as Lionel mentioned, art became a great source of healing for him from his trauma, particularly under house arrest. You would also have likely noticed that Lionel uses various mediums and styles in his expressions. So I'm going to ask you, without thinking too deeply, Can you please share in the chat just 1 to 3 words that you would use to describe some of the artworks that you see here? So don't think too deeply, just from first impressions, 1 to 3 words that you would use to describe Lionel's artwork.
Desiree, I'm not seeing anything. I don't know if it's just me.
There
we go.
Again quickly. Okay. Sorry, let me try again quickly.
Okay.
There we go. Can you see?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, sorry about that. So 1 to 3 words that you would use to describe Lionel's art. You can share those in the chat. Great. Melody, can I ask you to unmute and share the words that you used and why you feel that those words describe it best?
I think that they are colorful, abstract, and emotional. All of the pieces here use a lot of different colors, and they're very bright, vibrant colors. I think that they're abstract because none of them are very realistic. They aren't, they don't look, very picturesque. And I feel a lot of emotions from them. Yeah.
Great. Thank you so much. Margot, can I ask you to unmute and share your response, please?
I said it was very powerful and thought-provoking. I think most artists try to give you something that puts something in you or emotes something in you. And so with each picture, it can take me to a place that it may not take you, but I just think it's so thought-provoking. It makes you think not only what the artist was maybe thinking when he was painting it, but just what you see in that picture. And it could be totally different between what you see and what someone else sees. So I love it. I think it's beautiful. Thank you, Mr. Lionel.
Thank you.
Margot, for sharing. Andrew Gibson, can I ask you to share your response as well, please?
Yes. First of all, I just want to thank everyone for the information that we're receiving today. It is very powerful. But when I look at these pictures, I see strength. Where these characters in here has no shame or fear in doing what they're doing, and it reaches out to you and it sort of gives you some sort of energy when you look at it.
Brilliant, very well said. Thank you so much, Andrew. So I'm going to move into the last question that I have for Lionel and Christo. But please, if you do have any other questions, we do have a little bit more time. But Christo, if I can ask you to share first. You've both gone through the process of writing your stories, and Lionel, you've also used art as a form of expression. From your experience, what message do you have for people who are struggling with oppression or prejudice and bridging cultural divides? So what message would you bring to people who are struggling with that? Christo, if I can ask you to go.
Okay. I will say people must respect each other in life. People must work together, take their hands together and build a country together. It's like Mandela when he walked out of prison. He said, comrades, when his comrade says now the time to chase the whites in the sea and take over the country and take back what is ours. Then he said, no, comrades, it's now the time to take the hands of the enemy. Work harder than before that we can build the country together. And Mandela was the one who bring peace in our country. He was the one where was supposed to be a big war after Chris Hani was been shot. He bring calmness in our country and said, so white woman who reported the case and the white man was arrested and was taken to trial. And he tried to make peace in our country. And we must reconcile with each other. We must understand each other's differences. We must respect each other's religions. And that is what I can say to the people. Respect each other in life.
Thank you, Christo. Lionel, would you like to share as well?
Yeah, one of my major experience as a prisoner was to live together with fellow South Africans. Unfortunately, there were no white political prisoners, but we had Black prisoners from very different cultural experiences, different walks of life, from very different political prisoners. And as I said, for the first time, I was living together with South Africans, fellow South Africans. We cared for each other. That is the quality that I brought when I became an art teacher. I learned to bring people together. I belong to very different art organizations, took part in many different workshops, and we brought people from all different parts of the world together once a year for 10 days. And I did it many times. And we work together. We feed from each other. We learn from each other. We share. We care. And this is how we then broke those barriers that had kept us away from each other. Whether you're a white South African or Black South African, whether you come from very different countries, from India, from China, we work together in harmony, learn from each other. And that is what I learned in jail, and that is what I have carried with me for decades of my life. As an artist, as an art teacher, I can impart that knowledge, bring people together, share care, as Christo says, to make this a better world to live in.
That's beautifully put. Thank you so much, Lionel, and thank you so much, Christo, also for sharing your messages of inspiration. Are there any final questions? Anyone has?
I have one, Desi. As it pertains to languages, we've heard that theme as well throughout the other sessions that we've done. I'm just curious from both gentlemen, what languages you speak, if the languages that you speak were changed any by your time working or being on Robben Island.
You know, in Robben Island, the guards was mostly, instructions was mostly in Afrikaans in the early years, understand. Till later, younger guards came with a little bit more qualifications. They speak English with the prisoners, but mostly they speak Afrikaans, Dutch, if you put it that way, with each other. There was a few who speak English on the island.
And Mr. Davis, what about you?
In my particular case, I grew up with Afrikaans, but it was not the Afrikaans that was introduced by the rulers of the apartheid regime. It was an Afrikaans, the original Afrikaans, that was brought to the fore by the slaves working in the homes of Dutch people. It was a Creole language that was born, a bringing together of Dutch, French, indigenous languages. And that is the birth of Afrikaans. And that is the language I spoke at home. That is the language we still speak, not refined by books, by universities, but it was born with our people and has been with us for hundreds of years, that Afrikaans. It's not, that does not belong to the Afrikaners or who claim to be Afrikaners. It is a language of South Africans, black and white. They are the gave birth to Afrikaans. And that's the language that I speak, not refined. Secondly, I learned to speak English, a better English, when I started school, in my travels, and eventually going to university to study fine art, visual arts. I learned to speak English. And when I started working for the Robben Island Museum in 1997, I worked there for more than 10 years. That is when I learned to speak the way I am speaking now. The quality of my English improved because of my contact with people from very different parts of the world. And that is why I'm able to speak for a living today. It's because of I had learned to speak a better English. A better way of saying it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lionel. We are going to move into a brief time of reflection. It's really important to take a moment to reflect because we don't learn by just listening or experiencing until we actually take the time to consider what that experience means to us and how it can be applied to our own context and our own lives. So in light of the stories you've heard today, please take a moment to think about how these lessons apply to your own life and maybe what changes you need to make to exercise greater respect and empathy for others. Now, we've been so inspired by the way in which Christo has shared his story of unlikely friendships and how Mr. Davis has used art as a means of healing and expression. In just a moment, I'm going to play some music by the iconic Miriam Makeba, and I would like to ask you to use this time to create a collective visual tribute or graffiti board in honor of our guests today. So by using the annotation tools, which you will find at the top of your screen where you can see the screen sharing, if you look at the drop down for view options, you should find the annotation tool. By using those tools, please share any words, images, colors that express your experience of the session, what you've learned, what stood out, and how it might empower you to be more conscious about human rights, reconciliation, and the freedom of others. The instructions to find the annotation tool are in the chat if you do need to find that. I'm going to let Miriam Makeba serenade us for a little while, and you are welcome to create a beautiful visual tribute for us.
My Buya is another South African song. It comes from the townships, locations, reservations, whichever, near the cities of South Africa, where all the black South Africans live. And it's simply a plea to all Southern Africans to come together, share their problems, try to solve them in the manner and fashion that our great forefathers and kings, Shaka, Tingana, Tachwaya, Mziligazi, Sopuza, Mushwesh, Skukulu, Khama, Lutu, Lopengula, and all of them would have been proud of. And the words My Boy Africa simply mean, come back Africa. Sinyamazana tinapa tu abantundu basamza tina Africa imite toya bedungu bukad mawetu ifi de kasha legulu lekoyetu alungani mawetu kumbula no chasha no tingane amzini Busisela
Woo!
Thank you all so much. What a beautiful graffiti board. Lionel, have you got any comments to share as an artist?
Yeah, no, I'm impressed that it could come out spontaneously. That's lovely. That's the way I love working. Abstractly, figuratively. You just express yourself, and this is what they have done. Thank you so much for making me happy. I even shed a tear now.
Oh, Lionel, you are so precious. Great, thank you so much. I am going to ask Nadine if you can share some final words with us before we head out, as we have reached the end of our session.
Thank you. There's not much that I can say. I think it's all been said by Mr. Brand and Mr. Davis. Donkey is what I'll say on behalf of all of us. And if you're interested in learning more and continuing the journey with us for South Africa Virtual, please join us for our next session, which will be on April 15th. And also, if you have time later, visit the Global Learning website at Central Piedmont, and we'll have resources there as well that you can continue to learn about South Africa, including how you can join us for our physical study abroad in summer of 2022 when we travel. So on behalf of everyone at EDU Africa, from Davidson-Davie Community College, Central Piedmont Community College, thank you, gentlemen, and thanks everyone for joining. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much. There is also a very brief feedback form that has been shared in the chat. If you wouldn't mind just filling that in, we would love to hear your feedback. Thank you everyone so much for your active engagement today. Thank you for participating in the sensory engagements, in the chat, in the graffiti wall. We really have made this an exciting session. Thank you once again to Christo and Lionel for your amazing contributions. We always love hearing from you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you. Baie dankie, baie dankie.
Mooi bly, Lionel.
Lekker bly.